When people say, I will upload something to the cloud, well, the cloud is a metaphor for this machinery that is all over the face of the earth, deep inside our oceans. It's machinery. So why is this different to capitalism? I'm going to tell you a story, my story, regarding not what will happen, but what has already happened when we were otherwise occupied, not sufficiently observant of what was actually occurring. The book on which this story is going to be founded is called Technofeudalism, and the title, or actually the subtitle, which has created a lot of anger, especially amongst my fellow left-wingers. The subtitle is What Killed Capitalism? Because, you know, we left-wingers, we thought that we came to this world in order to overthrow capitalism. So there comes Varoufakis saying to other left-wingers that, you know what, capitalism has already been overthrown. And that didn't go down well with my fellow leftist Marxists. But I'm not here to please, I'm here to express that which I really do believe is happening to us. And it is a very serious moment in history. Of course, you may very well say, and you would be right, that every generation, every author, all of us, we would like to feel that we are on the cusp of a great transformation. And, you know, this is a delusion that everybody has suffered. All generations think that they were the generation when big things happened. But I do fear and think that our generation was unlucky enough to be on the cusp of such a great transformation. So, what am I going on about? Wherever we look, we witness the triumph of capital. Capital has steamrolled over the trades unions movement, civil rights movements, labor governments, social democracy, liberalism, even neoliberalism. Because, come to think of it, you know, the 2008 crisis and everything that followed after that was a complete defeat of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism was supposed to be the creed that the market knows best. Well, we saw what happens when you leave it to the market. Everything came crashing down, and you had, you know, the great and the good, the governments of the West, renationalizing or nationalizing in 2008, 2009, more sectors than Lenin ever did. So capital triumphed to such an extent, its triumph was so deep and so thunderous that it actually mutated, like a toxic virus which kills the host that keeps it alive. The mutation of capital that I want to talk to you about today has already killed the host, which is capitalism. So this is a great contradiction. Capital has never been more powerful than it is today, but it has been so powerful that it killed its host, capitalism. And what came in its place? My view, my hypothesis, is that a new system of producing, distributing values and power has sprung up, and the best way I can describe it is by this term, technofeudalism, which is not a very pleasant term, but then it's not a pleasant reality, and therefore I don't think we need pleasant words by which to describe it. So, let me get down to the nitty-gritty of it. I referred before to this great transformation. Well, the previous great transformation took place in this country. It was the Industrial Revolution, was it not? It was the great transformation, the great transition from feudalism to capitalism. It was a mind-boggling event in human history. It begat the modern world as we know it, with all its ills and all its great aspects. What was that great transformation all about? Under feudalism, you know that very well, you don't need me to say it, but just to establish some common ground, under feudalism, all power sprang from land ownership. If you owned land, substantial parts of land, then you had political power, economic power, discursive power, cultural power. Power was one thing. There was no such thing as a division between political power and economic power. If you owned land, then you had political power and you had economic power. And if you didn't have political power or economic power, that meant you didn't own any land. So the great cathedrals, wherever you look at, across Europe, in Britain, they were the result of accumulated ground rent. So if you had property, if you had land, you also owned essentially the communities that lived on that land. You had the political power to send the sheriff in and collect at the end of the harvest your share, that's your ground rent. If there were artisans working in your fiefdom, in your estate, you charge them for the right to be working and producing on your estate. So land was the source of power and wealth was accumulated ground rent. All the cathedrals, the castles, the House of Commons were all built on the basis of rent that came from property rights over land. Okay, that's feudalism. What happened with the Great Transformation? I'm not going to go into an analysis of how the transformation took place because then we would need another 2 such sessions for that. But with capitalism, the source of power shifted from ownership of land to ownership of machines. And wealth sprang not from ground rent anymore, but it sprang from profits. So with the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, it was the ownership of the steam engines. The railways. Later, with the second Industrial Revolution, it was the electricity grids and the telegraph poles and the telephone systems. And then later on with the vertically integrated mega firms like Henry Ford's or Westinghouse's and so on. So when we talk about capitalism, what do we mean? We mean a system where power comes from owning the machines that allow you to retain a residual after you've paid off your workers, your banker for the loans you've taken out, the landlord who owns the land that you pay ground rent. What you retain is the profit, and that profit is the source of all power under capitalism. It is this transformation from land and rent to machinery and profit that created the modern world, that created the hegemonic power of the United States, let's say today. My point now, in this talk and in this book, is that something quite remarkable has happened to capital in the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years. This is the mutation I was referring to before. Allow me to put it simply. Capital pre-existed capitalism by 10, 20,000 years. What's capital again? It's machinery. So, you fashion, you forge a plow and a tool. Why do you want a plow if you're a farmer? Because you want not to use it as an ornament, but you want to put it to use to plow the earth to produce corn or wheat. So the plow, the steam engine, the industrial robot today, they are all examples of capital goods, pieces of capital, in the sense that they are produced means of production. Things we produce, not because we want them, to use them as such, but only to produce something else. Produced means of production. A hammer, a plow, a tractor, a steam engine, an industrial robot, these are all produced means of production. Not this. What lives in here, and not just in here, in my phone, or your tablet, or your laptop, but also in the cell towers that allow for this to be networked with Google, with Meta, with Amazon, with Facebook, and so on. The optic fiber cables that are crisscrossing the earth, the oceans, the ocean bed, the server farms. If you go into a server farm owned by Amazon or by Microsoft, It is mind-boggling. I don't know whether you've ever seen anything like that. I remember visiting in somewhere between Washington State and Idaho, inside the guts of a mountain, a Microsoft server farm that was 1.5 kilometers long underground, so that it would be kept cool, with minimal electricity. And it was just like being in a James Bond movie. Something between being in a James Bond movie and in a factory. Lots of servers, very few workers, all automated, of course. But it's machinery, right? So when people say, I will upload something to the cloud, well, the cloud is a metaphor for this machinery that is all over the face of the earth, deep inside our oceans. It's machinery. So why is this different to capitalism? Well, because this machinery that I just described, allow me to call it cloud capital, to distinguish it from the steam engines, the plows, the industrial robots that are produced means of production. Now, what does this do? What does Google do? What does Amazon do? What does Uber do? What does Airbnb do? Well, using all this machinery, it allows for the owner of this machinery to engage us using the machinery. Now, this is quite spectacular per se. Think about it. Up until now, your relationship with capital, our relationship with capital, was always mediated via the market. So, you wanted to buy a car made by Henry Ford, you had to go to the dealership, you would buy the car. You never see the capital goods that built it, the production lines, unless you visited a factory. But you didn't have to visit a factory, right? So your relationship between you and Henry Ford's capital was mediated via the market. You had an advertiser who managed to convince you, to your detriment, that you needed to eat a Big Mac through one of these McDonald's advertisements. So when that happened, all you had to do was go to the McDonald's to get a Big Mac. So again, you'd have to go through the retail shop, through the marketplace. But what does Amazon do? Something very, very different. Has any one of you seen one of these Alexa machines that Amazon provides you with, Amazon Prime? It sits on your desk. You give it orders. You say to it, Alexa, tell me a story, or play some music, or switch off the lights, or what book should I buy? And when it says you should buy, not a book by Varoufakis, but by Malcolm Rifkin or somebody else, well, bringing everything together, that machine behaves as if it is your servant, your slave, but it isn't. It is an interface, it's a portal to the cloud capital that belongs to Jeff Bezos, right? And what happens is, it receives all these instructions and questions from you, and because it is networked with all the rest of the machinery that I described before, it gets to know you. And then it finds ways of asking you questions that help you train it better to train you to train it better to know you. And at some point, it starts giving you advice. I don't know about you, but when Spotify suggests music for me to listen to, I always like it. Sometimes I love it. Whereas when my best friends recommend music to me, I usually don't like it. The machine knows me better than my friends do. Same with Amazon and books. Amazon has never recommended to me a book which I didn't enjoy reading. Why? Because of this dialectical process. I train it to train me, to train it, to train me, to know me better. Once it knows me and it starts giving me advice which hits, the right spot, the right nerve, then it has won my trust. Subconsciously, I trust it. It has given me good advice before, better than my friends, so I trust it. So through this dialectical process, when I say, okay, Alexa, or I type in, or Siri, or not just Alexa, right? All these machines work in exactly the same way. When I type in electric bicycle, and it comes up with a list of 3 or 4, these will be good for you, I will buy it. But I won't buy it from a marketplace. I will just click, and the electric bicycle is going to magically appear at my doorstep. So think about it. Amazon resembles a cloud fiefdom, where there are lots of buyers, lots of sellers. It looks like a market, but it is not, because there is no degree of decentralization. There is nothing like, you can't talk to other buyers. You cannot talk to sellers. You cannot choose the sellers. It's a relationship between you and the algorithm, Alexa. So the algorithm has a name, right? So you feel that it is like another human being, but it's not, it's an algo, right? And this algo does, let me just summarize everything I've said so far. It does the following. It trains you to train it to input desires into your soul, and then satiates those desires, bypassing every market. And why does it do that? Because Jeff Bezos collects 40% of the price you pay for the electric bicycle. He hasn't produced the electric bicycle. He takes it from the capitalist who produces the electric bicycle using proletarian labor and so on and so forth, right? But the profits, most of them, the bulk of the profits, are siphoned off the traditional capital owner. And that goes to the owner of the cloud capital who is not producing anything. So now we have a new form of capital that is not a produced means of production, but it is a produced means of behavior modification. That is no longer capitalism. Welcome to technofeudalism.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.